Welcome back to Network Evolution. In this series, I take a look at individual battle chips that have had multiple appearances in the Battle Network games and see if and how the chip was changed over time. In my first ever episode of Network Evolution, we discussed the Boomer series of chips, which were introduced in Battle Network 3 and remained as a chip for the rest of the series. Today, we're going to once again be taking a look at a chip introduced in Battle Network 3, but this time, we're going to be looking at a Navi chip. In my most recent episode of my Folder Decoder series from a couple weeks ago, I showed off a folder that uses the Darkman series of chips. And while making that video, I realized that the Darkman chips technically did reappear in Battle Networks 4 and 5, and so I figured those would be the perfect chips to analyze in this video. So let's dive right into it by first looking at the Darkman chips in Battle Network 3. Darkman was introduced as a Navi in the secret area, the post-game of Battle Network 3. Unfortunately, this means that you can't encounter him or obtain his chip until after you've beaten the main story of the game, a trend that will actually continue in the next two games. Just like every other Navi chip in this game, with two exceptions, the Darkman chips come in 5 versions, with versions 1 to 4 being Mega chips, and the version 5 chip being a Giga chip. I've explained the Darkman chips in detail in my latest Folder Decoder episode, which will be linked in the description below, but here's a quick refresher on how it works. The Darkman chips uses his Black Wing attack, which opens dark holes above your opponent's columns and sends out bats to attack. The bats will travel down every column that spawns a dark hole, even if there are no enemies for them to attack in a column. Each of the Darkman chips has a base damage of 30, and they send out an increased number of bats for each successive chip. The V1 Darkman chip sends out 16 bats, and each version afterwards sends out an additional 2, topping off at 24 bats sent by Darkman V5. We're going to be saying the word bats a lot in this video. The Darkman chips have a few interesting properties that make them pretty fun to use, at least in my opinion. First off, there's the fact that Darkman only opens holes to spawn bats in columns where your opponent has panels. This means that if you column lock your opponent, all of the bats sent out by the chip will go down that singular column, maxing out the damage of the chip. And since it's a Navi chip, you can use Navi plus 20 or Navi plus 40 chips to buff their damage, which can potentially make Darkman as strong as the Silver Bullet combo. One of the most interesting things about Darkman is that the chips actually set a dark hole in the panel in front of you after they are used, similarly to the hole standard chip in Battle Network 4. This is something that most players probably haven't experienced, since the purpose of hole is a bit niche. Essentially, Capcom tried to implement dark chips for the first time in Battle Network 3, though they act very differently than they do in the next two games. The dark chips present in Battle Network 3 include the Base, Serenade, Base Plus, and Dark Aura Giga chips. Normally, these chips can't be used by Megaman unless he meets one of two requirements. You either need to have the Dark License program equipped in your Navi Customizer, or you need to have a dark hole open on the field. So, you can use the Darkman chips and then use the hole that they spawn to use one of the dark chips in Battle Network 3. Personally, I just use Darkman to try and delete Navis in a single blow. There's a reason that I made a Folder Decoder video about this series of chips. They're fun to use and can make a really strong folder that can help you collect Navi chips you might be missing, or to take on the Omega Navi fights. I honestly recommend trying out a Darkman folder if you haven't done so before, or if you're bored of using the same folders every time you play the game. Just keep in mind that you won't be seeing Darkman until the post-game. Things changed drastically in Battle Network 4, starting with the inclusion of Darkman himself. Unfortunately, Darkman is only present in Battle Network 3 and does not make a return in any of the games afterwards. This of course means that the Darkman chips aren't in Battle Network 4, so how could I possibly be making a Network Evolution video about them? The answer was already given earlier. The Darkman chips use the Black Wing attack, and that's what the Darkman chips became in the transition to Battle Network 4. Just like in the previous game, the Black Wing chip is a Mega chip which can only be obtained in Undernet 5 in the post-game. To get the Black Wing chip, you first need to have all 6 double souls, which requires you to be on your 3rd playthrough of the game. Then, you need to have obtained all the standard chips in the game in order to unlock a door in Undernet 5, behind which you find and battle against Base. After defeating Base, you can take on a challenge to defeat a series of virus fights in order to get 3 of the so-called evil chips: Muramasa, Anubis, and of course, Blackwing. In Battle Network 4, the damage of the Blackwing chip was lowered compared to the damage of the Darkman chips, now dealing only 20 damage per hit. In addition, since Blackwing isn't a Navi chip, you unfortunately can't increase its damage with Navi plus 20, and have to rely on Attack plus 30 or Attack plus 10 chips. And since it's a mega chip, you can only have one copy of it in your folder, with only one version of it available since it's not a Navi chip anymore. As for the total number of hits, Blackwing sends out 18 bats in Battle Arc 4, the same as Darkman V2 did in the previous game. Overall, the nerf to 20 base damage as well as the inability to use Navi Plus chips makes Blackwing weaker than the Darkman chips were. However, there's another big change to Blackwing that needs to be discussed. Remember, I refer to it as one of the evil chips in the game. Battle Arc 4 introduced a new karma system which revolves around the use of dark chips, which can be used when Megaman is in the worried emotion. Using dark chips will decrease Megaman's max HP by 1 and decrease his karma value. When his karma is low enough, Megaman starts battles with the evil emotion, which makes dark chips always pop up in your custom window and prevents you from using double souls or getting full synchro. In addition, if Megaman takes a lethal hit, his dark soul spawns and takes over the fight for some time. The reason I very briefly explained the karma system is because, similar to how there are restrictions that limit your use of the dark chips in Battle Arc 3, you can only use Battle Arc 4's evil chips as well as the DS Navi chips if Megaman's karma is low enough. The chips that can only be used when Megaman is evil include Static, Hole, Dark Line, Muramasa, Anubis, Element Dark, Bug Curse, Bug Charge, Black Barrier, and, of course, Blackwing. One interesting thing about Blackwing is that it technically synergizes well with the DS Navi chips, since it sets a dark hole on the panel you're standing on. This time around, dark holes are used to power up DS Navi chips, which deal more damage for each dark hole on the field. I'll be honest, I've never done a Dark Soul run of Battle Arc 4 or 5, so I don't have much experience with using Blackwing. As far as I know, using Evil Megaman is more of a PvP tactic than it is something that's considered good in normal gameplay, especially since you can't gain back any of the HP that you've lost from using dark chips. That being said, I can confidently argue that even if you did try out a Dark Megaman run, Blackwing isn't all that great. The W code it comes in is a bit awkward unless you plan on using Woodman or Windman DS alongside it, plus the other evil chips are much better, especially Muramasa. That being said, if you enjoy the thrill of doing big damage by setting up and using multi-hit chips, you'll probably enjoy using Blackwing in your Dark Soul run anyways. Blackwing made its final appearance in Battle Arc 5, which is a bit disappointing given the fact that fellow evil chips Muramasa and Anubis got to move on to Battle Arc 6. Blackwing doesn't really change much at all going from 4 to 5. Once again, its base damage is 20 per hit, and it sends out 18 bats to attack enemies. In addition, it's also a post-game mega chip, though you can actually obtain multiple copies of it this time. Blackwing is available in the Nebula Area 2 shop, but can also be obtained immediately prior to reaching that area, as it's also the reward you get from defeating the Nebula 1 Liberation in 10 turns or less. Since it's still a mega chip, you can of course only keep one copy of Blackwing in your folder. And just like in Battle Arc 4, it comes in a W code, which is in my opinion quite a bit better than it was in Battle Arc 4. So if the chip hasn't changed at all, what's new for Blackwing in Battle Arc 5? Well, that would be the environment around it. First off, dark chips themselves were changed in Battle Arc 5, having their own section of your chip library and being found throughout the game just like any other chip. This time, rather than dark chips only showing up as an extra chip while Megaman is in the worried state, you can add 3 of them directly into your folder. Most players would use those dark chips to activate Chaos Unisons, but if you want to use Blackwing, you'll once again have to drop your karma a bit. Most notably, there are 2 dark chips that work perfectly with Blackwing in this game. The first is Dark Lance, which also makes its return from Battle Arc 4 and comes in a W code, giving it synergy with Blackwing. I think that these 2 chips work well together not just because of their shared chip code, but also because they're both at their strongest when your opponent is column locked. If your opponent is trapped in their back column, Blackwing gets all 18 hits on an enemy, and Dark Lance is guaranteed to hit. And although I personally enjoy Dark Lance, as Cloudman SP knows all too well, I also enjoy a different dark chip to use with Blackwing, that being the amazing Attack Plus 50 chip. Using just Attack Plus 50 itself already powers up Blackwing to make it nearly as strong as it was at its best in Battle Arc 4, doing 1,260 damage total. When fully powered up with Attack Plus 50, Attack Plus 30, and 2 Attack Plus 10s, Blackwing can deal 2,160 damage, which one-shots pretty much every SP Navi so long as you can column lock them. I'm looking at you two, Napalm Man and Gridman. Stop trying to ruin my fun. So overall, I think Blackwing is quite a bit stronger in Battle Arc 5 than it was in the previous game. Plus, you can use it to take on the Nebula area if you're going with a Dark Soul run of the game, since it'll do some good damage to viruses or the Nebula 6 Navi battles when comboed with attack plus 50. But as I've mentioned, I don't have any personal experience with utilizing evil chips in Battle.Arc 5. At least not yet. And that's about it for Darkman and Blackwing. These chips didn't end up going on a wild rollercoaster ride the way that the Boomer chips did throughout the series, but there were still small enough changes from game to game to warrant making this video. Honestly, I did have other ideas for chips I wanted to discuss in this series after I did that Boomer video, but since I did that Darkman folder so recently in Folder Decoder, I figured why not just make this video now? It'll make a nice pair with that Folder Decoder episode. But with that, we're done with Darkman and Blackwing. They're fun and interesting chips for sure. It's just a shame that Blackwing was nerfed compared to the Darkman chips. I feel like it would have been perfectly fine for the damage of Blackwing to be a base of 30 in Battle.Arc 4, since being evil Megaman means that you can't double the damage of Blackwing with full synchro. I can understand some chips doing less damage in the games as a way of making sure that full sync wasn't too powerful, but why nerf a chip that can't benefit from the mechanic at all? But at the end of its run, I'd say that Blackwing is perfect as it is in Battle.Arc 5. It doesn't need any more damage than it has thanks to attack plus 50, and there are so many other chips in the W code that can be paired with it. A fitting end for this chip. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel for some more Megaman Battle.Arc content. I've had several people asking, and yes, I will be doing a Dark Soul run once I've completed the 12 Double Soul runs in Battle.Arc 4, so you'll likely see me using Blackwing in the future. I've also got more essay videos on the way for both Megaman Battle Network, as well as for Pokemon for anyone interested in those games. And as always, thanks for watching.